So in this video, we're going to go into exactly why I thought that Morbius 2022 is a bad movie. And it's gonna be a long one, folks. I don't know how long exactly, but honestly, this movie doesn't deserve to be talked about as long as I'm going to talk about it. As a recap, I do not recommend this movie. I think that you should not watch it. That would be for the best. But let's get into it. Content warning. In this movie, there's superhero and PG-13 horror movie violence, a little bit of blood, a little bit of murder, some light gore. There's some gay baiting and tokenization, which we'll get into. I'm going to be talking about my normal politics stuff, which means I'm going to be making fun of Republicans because they deserve it. And there are going to be mentions of the movie Morbius 2022. I'm sorry. Gotta feed that algorithm somehow, though, right? This is going to be my full spoiler review of Morbius. If you do not wish to have the movie spoiled for you, now's the time to cut out. Watch the movie if you want. Again, I recommend that you don't. My reviews cannot legally be called a replacement for the movie, and this isn't going to be a replacement for the movie, mainly because I'm going to try to be intentionally funny. I can't guarantee that I'm going to be intentionally funny, but I'm going to try. I guess so did the movie, but it didn't help. So the movie opens with Morbius, played by Jared Leto, off in the jungle somewhere, collecting some bats. He does that really stupid movie thing where you cut the palm of your hand in order to bleed to attract vampire bats because reasons, I guess. After that bizarre scene is over, we do a flashback where Morbs meets a boy Lucian who is going to be called Milo for the rest of the movie. Morbius gives him the name Milo. It's not exactly clear why he just accepts it. It sounds like this was someone else's name beforehand. And new Milo just accepts it. They become quick friends. They establish that they both have the same blood disease that is slowly killing them. Turns out Morbius is a smart boy who does smart boy things. He's good at fixing stuff and he's good at origami. So naturally, with that much potential, the doctor that takes care of them ships him off to some other school where he can do the learnings goods. Morbs leaves behind a letter for Milo, basically saying, hey bud, we're still going to be friends. It's us against the world. All that. Milo immediately loses it. Like, it just flies straight out a window. He chases it down. Some bullies have grabbed it. They're making fun of him. He demands the letter back. They refuse because they're bullies that make fun of people who fucking are in crutches. Fucked up, yo. And Milo loses it and bashes one of them in the face with his crutch. They decide to get revenge by beating the hell out of him. Good fun, I guess. The doctor, whose name I can't be bothered to remember, and I don't think that they even gave him a name, necessarily, intervenes after that the boys scatter off, all except for the one that Milo knocked the fuck out, and Milo just starts beating up on that kid. Doctor pulls him off, but this does establish quite early on that little Milo has a violent streak. It's good to know. I don't think that'll come up again later in the movie. It's definitely not like the most obvious foreshadowing I've ever seen in a movie. Definitely not. Definitely. Back in the present, Morbs is up for a Nobel Prize, or as they say in the movie, a Nobel Prize. I don't know why these Sony movies in particular have so much trouble pronouncing things.
We call them symbiotes.
He invented True Blood. Basically, it's just a blood substitute that works the real goods. He's a super cool genius doctor, but like, he doesn't care about like status or whatever, because like, he doesn't even stay around for like a speech or whatever. He like totally ditches the lame award ceremony, and like, that's because he's super cool or whatever. He reveals to his lady doctor friend, named Martine Bancroft, played by Adrienne Ajorna, that he managed to smuggle in some bats. Technically, she reveals that she knows this, but, like, whatever. He managed to smuggle in the bats that he stole from that jungle into his lab somehow. Also, Dr. Martine definitely wants to be on Dr. Morbs' dick. Like, I know that sounds crude, and that's because I am being crude, because, honestly, if this movie was just a porn, it would be a better movie. So I had to think about something while I was bored out of my mind. He starts doing an experiment on said bats. He, like, removes their pancreas, I think. I don't remember. He removes some bat stuff and does some science, I guess, in order to make bat goo that he uses on a mouse that I guess could have a similar blood disease that they have that they're trying to cure. They don't establish it. He just kind of injects a mouse with some fucking bat goo and then mouse dies. They go off to do something else for a minute, but then Dr. Martine notices that the mouse is alive again. It's a miracle. Morbs, who's super excited about this, decides to go tell his buddy, Matt Smith, who's playing Milo, who is also inexplicably rich. Like, he just has a bunch of fucking money. They never explain why he has money other than he can gamble real good, and I don't know if that's where he got his money. He's just rich because he owns the research company that Morbs is working for. Anyway, they go on for a walk. Their conditions are quite serious. Both of them need crutches in order to function whatsoever. They both look to be in a lot of pain, which, like mood, I was in a lot of pain watching this movie. And not just because I normally have a headache, because this movie causes me pain, because it's so boring. I've never been in pain from so much boredom. It's impressive. Milo inquires about Dr. Martine and whether or not, they're together, for entirely heterosexual reasons. It's for the cure. He's concerned that any distractions, like a love life with someone else, might cloud Morbius's judgment. That's definitely it. There's nothing else to read. Don't look too much into it. Especially not when they start leaning real close into each other and start whispering about how they love each other in each other's ears and how it's them against the world. There's nothing going on. Just know that it's entirely heterosexual, and there's no subtext here whatsoever. Morbs tells Milo that there's a potential cure. They get really cozy in the movie. They're just right up on each other. And Morbs does the sexiest thing that you can do when you're that close to your completely straight friend who's completely straight and has no interest in you otherwise. He asks for a boat to be traveled to international waters so that he can do the experiment where it's not illegal. This is like one of two ethically shaky things that he's doing, and I'm pretty sure no one would blame him. Other than PETA, but that's because he hurt bats. And they'd rather have him die than the bats die. And to be fair, I'd probably rather have Jared Leto die than the bats as well, but that's because Jared Leto's a creep. Milo readily agrees to this, eager for a cure, so that's cool. Martine is assisting him on the boat when they get to the next scene. Morbs looks a lot like Christian Bale in The Mechanist for a moment, and that's weird because in a couple of minutes, he's going to look like Christian Bale in Batman Begins. At this point, we're basically just ripping off the Green Goblin scene from Spider-Man 1, except everything about this is worse because you can't possibly give a fuck about these characters yet. You'd have to be the most sympathetic or empathetic person on Earth in order to give a shit about these flat-ass characters so far. We introduce some mercenaries, and they're all jerks, or at least their leader is a jerk, implying that the rest of them are jerks, so that when Morbs eats them in a couple of minutes, we don't feel as bad, because that might be interesting if we felt anything whatsoever in this movie. Morbius comes to his senses and calls a mayday, and then gets off the boat, leaving Martine behind in a coma. He did make sure that she was alive and breathing before leaving, but still kind of a dick move, so I guess, that's another point in the anti-hero thing. Kind of, I guess. We explore his powers some, now that he's a vampire, and explore some of his weaknesses as well. He's discovered that he has an insatiable lust for blood. A bloodlust, if you will. But he can totally sustain himself off of the cool Blue True Blood, now coming in a store near you. Blue True Blood. Like True Blood Classic, it also keeps vampires from drinking you, but with a cool new flavor. But we find out that the True Blood doesn't last very long. It only lasts about 6 hours right now, and its effectiveness is slowly decreasing with time, giving us a clock, which would be interesting if this movie was actually going to do anything with it. But they don't. They kind of forget about that plot line at the end of the movie. So, spoilers for the end of the movie, I guess. We also discover that he can jump really well, and he can kind of teleport a little bit, but that's never explained. And he also has a weird kinship with bats. They just straight up recreate the scene from Batman vs. Superman with the bats flying around him, except it's Jared Leto instead of a small child in a boring dream sequence. Agents Stroud, played by Tyrese Gibson, and Rodriguez, played by Al Madrigal, investigate the attacks. I guess they're a special investigations unit because they imply that they were also characters in the Venom movie, but I honestly can't remember the Venom movie. So they might have been. They discovered that Martine was basically left to die on the ship. She's been transported to the hospital and is in a coma. And Rodriguez is quippy and the only character I don't hate this far because, frankly, he's the only character that has a real personality. It's not a fun personality per se.
Holy water? Really?
Yeah. You ever see Lost Boys?
It's literally anything in this desert of a movie. I absolutely understand why MovieBob said that he could not review this.
There really is that little going on in this movie. I have nothing else. I couldn't write a review if I wanted to.
It's really hard to remember any details, and I watched the movie 3 days ago. And no, I'm not watching this again. I'm not going to pay money to watch this movie again. I didn't even pay the first time. I bought the person lunch instead. With that said, the agents quickly suspect that it's Morbius that did the murders because of reasons, I guess. They never explain why. I guess they've technically found one of his little pieces of origami, and it might have had his fingerprints on it, but they never established that. They just see the ship, see that Dr. Martine was there, and then they assume that Morbius is the murderer. Not that they particularly care about that, but we'll get to that later. Milo drops by the Horizon Medical or whatever it's called and checks on Morbius, who, as it turns out, has been blood fasting. He's just not drinking anything to see what happens when he gets really, really thirsty. And if he's anything like me, he just drinks way too much soda. This isn't sponsored by Dr. Pepper, but it could be. Technically, I guess it's still sponsored by my stupid books. Buy them. Anyway, Milo drops off. Morbs asks for some blood, and Milo gets him some of that synthetic stuff. After giving Morbs some blood, Milo is just really impressed at what a specimen Jared Leto has become. He's just really impressed at the physicality that he has right now. And it's entirely straight, it's just about how well that Morbius recovered from the disease. It's nothing else, I promise. It's definitely not anything else. It's not. You can't prove it. There's no other subtext in the movie. Ignore any subtext. This is just one straight man hitting on another straight man because of how good he looks. Wait, fuck. I didn't say that. This is so fucking stupid. Milo asks when he's going to get the cure as well, and Morbs refuses because he's become a monster that drinks blood, and that's mildly inconvenient. This upsets Milo quite a bit. He says that he doesn't want to live in pain anymore, and that's a fucking mood. That could have been the entire theme of the movie. Like, the actual literal decision to live in pain or to be, functional, but effectively a monster. I guess that is a theme of the movie, but it doesn't really go anywhere. When Milo becomes more insistent, Morbs tries to scare him off with the bad, rejected Buffy the Vampire Slayer face, and I guess it works. Martine wakes up from her coma, but she doesn't tell anyone anything, really. The cops question her, but she's just like, nah fam, I don't know anything, other than that hospital jello sucks, because low-hanging fruit, I guess, we gotta make fun of hospital food. A nurse in Morbs' place, Horizon Medical, is killed, and the cops just assume that it's him. To be fair though, he also assumes that it was him, so he starts trying to run at first, but the cops basically catch him immediately, and, he doesn't even resist. He just kind of gets confused at his new powers because he had never been outside, I guess, with his powers. Whatever, I don't know. He's arrested and interviewed by the cops, and he's kind of going through blood withdrawal, which is unfortunate because, again, it makes him really thirsty. The cops openly say that they don't really blame him for killing the mercs because they probably had something else going on that was illegal in their history. And I guess, fuck criminals, right? It's okay if you killed them. That's a weird message for the movie. But they do blame him for killing the nurse. And he also blames himself for that. He seems guilty over all of it, because again, he's a bad anti-hero who actually does have a full conscience, and we'll get to that eventually. He does a spooky face at the cops, but they don't really seem to notice. They just think that he's growling at them, I guess. I don't know. Milo, impersonating a lawyer somehow, drops by the cell. For some reason, they let him go to the cell instead of an interview room. And, gives Morbius some blood that he managed to smuggle into the jail. It's a really confusing plot point. I have so many questions about how that worked. But, he decides to walk off, and after talking a little bit, whipping a little bit between each other, because, I guess they did technically try, at least as hard as Naruto, to establish a friendship here. In that they told us that they were friends, and they are on screen together sometimes. So, friends. But Milo leaves pretty early on after the interview, and he leaves behind his cane, which allows Morbius to realize that Matt Smith, who has always looked kind of like an otherworldly monster, has finally lived up to it. Except in this movie, he's weirdly buff, and that's, weird. Matt Smith being buff is weird. Don't get me wrong, if he likes that, more power to him, but it's really fucking odd to me. You dig? Morbs decides to escape the jail to stop him because he's murdering innocent people, and he was the one who killed the nurse, and he admits to as much. Milo tries the classic vampire gambit of, just give in, bro. You want to. It feels so good to give in. I want you to give in to me. I want you. But in a completely straight way, okay? There's nothing going on here. He's just one man trying to get another man to drink some bodily fluids with him. That sounds way grosser than just being gay. Let people just be gay. Morbs really refuses, and Milo decides to, emphasize that he's the bad guy of the movie, and he drinks a couple of cops, which I'm supposed to feel bad about, but I don't, because I don't care frankly. I'm just tired at this point, and I want this movie to end. Morbs doesn't do anything to stop Milo from killing the cops. He just kind of lets it happen because, I don't know, I guess that's another thing that's supposed to make him an anti-hero, but it just kind of makes him look like a fucking idiot, to be honest. Morbs starts walking away, and Milo starts to chase him very, 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 very slowly. And that's when Morbs discovers he can fly. He can use air currents to, like, glide or something. And it's weird, and like the effect is kind of cool. I kind of like the air current effect. It's kind of neat, but at the same time, I don't know, I just feel like this plot point was established solely so that we could learn that he could fly, and that's done better in pretty much every other superhero movie. Like, I will take the Shazam flight sequence every time over really anything that this movie does. Watch Shazam, it's a better movie. The police search for Morbs, assuming that he's the one that killed all those people, because, I mean, they don't know of any other vampires yet, so that's fair. And, you know, he's the only one that they know of that could drink people. Martine manages to ditch her stalkers, both Milo and the police, and meets up with Morbs. She verifies that he, unlike me, is not vulnerable to sunlight. But I'm not a vampire, I'm just, like, Irish. The sun has been our enemy for as long as we've existed, really. Morbs finds some money counterfeiters, and he decides to take over their lab for some reason. And this is supposed to be a funny point in the movie. Like, they make a joke about how this is the scene in the movie where the guy in the hoodie comes and tells them all to scatter, and when he doesn't, he kicks their ass, and then he proceeds to kind of do that, but it was lame. Like, it was really lame. Like, he hurts one guy, kind of, and they all escape, and everyone is fine. He sends Martine to go back to the lab in order to get some supplies to make something that we don't know about yet, because it's Chekhov's gun, I guess. I don't know. It's not a particularly well done Chekhov's gun, because it's not established what it is yet. I forgot that Milo recreates the dancing scene from Spider-Man 3, except somehow it's even more uncomfortable. Which is weird, because the point of that scene is that it's uncomfortable. The point of this scene is to show off the fact that Matt Smith is buff, and that might be why I'm uncomfortable. I might just, like, not want Matt Smith to be buff. I want him to be a tall, lanky man in a fez. That's a Doctor Who reference, because why not reference every better piece of media? Like, all of it. All of media is better than this. As Martine is collecting stuff from the lab, Milo confronts her and asks, "Hey dog, do you know where my boyfriend is? I mean, do you know where my friend is? My friend, who is a boy, and my friend. My boyfriend, you know what I mean." And she lies about it because Milo is a scary vampire, and Milo, being a scary vampire, knows that she's lying about it. But he doesn't really push her on that, and instead goes out to get a drink from a bar after doing more cringy dancing. And some classic bar jerks decide to, like, fuck with Milo, and Milo decides to leave the bar very calmly and rationally, and is definitely not going to be waiting outside of the bar in order to drink them all. Oh wait, that's exactly what he does, because this movie's predictable and boring and terrible, and I hate it. Morbs crafts the equivalent of medical stakes in order to kill both him and Milo, which is almost interesting. It shows at the very least that he's willing to do an anti-heroic sacrifice in order to make sure that, you know, people stay safe or whatever. It's very anti-heroic to do that, to be that selfless, you know? But we'll get to that. The cops start investigating that new murder scene, and they discover the camera was recording, and that, you know, now there are two vampires. It's leaked to the media for whatever reason. They have a picture of Matt Smith, but they don't recognize him as Matt Smith because the footage is kind of grainy. But you know who does recognize him is the doctor that raised Milo. And he confronts Milo, and Milo's like, "Hey dog, you seem to be a tall drink of water," by which I mean, I'm going to drink you a little bit, but I'm going to leave you just alive enough so that you call Morbs and he comes over and you can die in his arms, because that's the thing that we needed in this movie. We needed to do every fucking classic movie moves. So I don't remember exactly at what point this happens in the movie. It's somewhere around here where Milo spies on Martine and Morbs. Why are there so many M names in this movie? Whatever. At some point during the movie, Milo spies on Morbius kissing Martine, and he's very upset by this. I mean, how dare Morbius be someone else's friend who was a boy? He's supposed to be Milo's friend who is a boy. Why? I don't... He's very mad about this, but for entirely straight reasons, I promise. They're definitely not trying to suggest that there's any kind of relationship between Milo and Morbius. That would be impossible. So I think the way that actually worked is Milo spies on Morbius and Martine making out. Gross, straight people. He gets upset. The doctor confronts him. The doctor calls Morbius after Milo drinks him a little bit, and then Morbius goes there, allowing Milo the chance to kidnap Martine Martine for not jealous reasons. He's definitely not just jealous. It's to draw Morbius out. That's definitely the reason. That's what else could it be? Milo basically kills Martine, and it's really boring. And just like with the Doctor, Morbius gets there at exactly the end of their life, and they kiss one last time, and she bites his lip, and she drinks the blood a little bit from the wound. And so she's gonna become a vampire. Like, it kind of blows a hole in my vampires as a metaphor for homosexuality theory, but the rest of this movie's not been very consistent, so why should I have to be? Anyway, so with all of that happening, he decides to drink Martine because Martine gave him consent to do so, which is also another vampire trope. Like, in order to become a proper vampire, you have to drink the vampire's blood, and the vampire has to drink your blood, and this does a thing, that does a thing, and makes you vampire, I guess. I don't know. I thought that vampires were created via magic bat goo, according to this movie, but I guess you can also just do that. And I know it hasn't happened yet, but it'll happen by the end of the movie. So, now fully powered up on human blood, Milo and Morbius start a fight. It's boring and very CGI heavy, and, like, not much really happens, honestly. They slap each other around a bit, and then they end up in a giant crater for some reason. I don't really know. I wasn't paying attention. I was kind of drunk at this point, to be perfectly honest. And, like, the fight's just not very interesting. The end of the fight is that we use the ultrasonic bat sound thingy from Batman Begins in order to overwhelm Milo with bats, because for some reason he doesn't have a kinship with bats. I don't know. And then we use this in order to do a sneak attack and get 3d6 extra damage as we stab him with the vampire stake that is made of magic medicine that kills Milo, and we're very sad about this, probably. Oh, and you know how I said Martine becomes a vampire at the end of the movie? She opens her eyes and does the horror movie thing. Oh, vampire, oh, I want to suck your dick. We do an end credit scene. Sony did a last minute edit in order to include the No Way Home fracture, except it looks really bad. It looks like the Great Value No Way Home fracture. And Vulture appears in a jail cell, and he's released from jail for some reason, because, I mean, he didn't exist in this universe prior. And it's just their way of trying to shoehorn Sony's MCU into the actual MCU, and it's not going to work. Marvel will never acknowledge this. It's just, Sony, stop trying to make this happen. It's never gonna happen. Then there's a second end credit scene where Michael Keaton's Vulture meets up with Morbius, and they imply that they're making the Sinister Six. Yeah, it's boring. But that's the end of the movie. Thank fucking God. Now I can just talk about the movie some more. That's upsetting. So, in this review, I've implied a lot that Matt Smith's character, Milo, has a romantic attraction to Jared Leto's Morbius. And that's kind of problematic, and I want to go into why. But first, I need to establish that vampire films and vampire media in general has always been intensely sexual and has been used as a metaphor for coming out of the closet and being openly gay a lot. Vampire media, in general, has always been intensely sexual. That's just what it is. In Bram Stoker's Dracula, the original, Dracula has a harem, which has always been associated with sexual deviancy. Polyamory is just not acceptable in a modern-day Judeo-Christian setting. That's what it is. And to further matters, in 1992's adaptation of Dracula, we made the Draculinas, Dracula's harem, canonically bisexual. They were openly sexualizing each other and the lead that they were trying to lead down the path of degeneracy. And granted, part of it is for titillation, but another part of it is as a means of establishing that these are bad people. That's why he has to resist them. Louis and Lestat from Interview with the Vampire were intensely gay. Louis was attracted to Lestat, and he relied on Lestat in a lot of ways, and Lestat was very aggressively in love with Louis. Both, my understanding, is for the book and for the movie. That's the text of the movie. The movie is a jilted lover is slowly tormenting their ex solely because they don't want to be together anymore. Carmilla was a novel written in the 19th century, and it was intensely gay. It's literally about a lesbian vampire, and it spawned several lesbian vampire movies in the 70s. Fright Night from 1985, I believe, also conflates homosexuality and being a vampire, a fear of the other, and being an outsider. And the most on the nose that I can possibly get with this is True Blood. Vampire-human marriage is used as a terrible metaphor. Gay marriage, marriage equality. And I also want to recap where I'm coming from with Milo to just make sure that, I have my ducks in a row. Make sure that, you guys get my point. I think you do at this point, because you're smart. I know that you're smart. You're so smart. Why are you so smart? You're so pretty right now, too. You know what would make you even prettier, though? Subscribing to my Patreon. Oh, God. Milo seems to be very romantically interested in Morbius. He opens the movie before he's even a vampire by scoping out a romantic rival. He asks Morbius directly whether or not, Martine is his girlfriend. That's what that scene is about. He frames it as though he's asking, to make sure that Milo is not getting distracted, and it's kind of a playful rib. But at the same time, even then, especially a scene or two later, they literally say that they love each other. And I know, men can platonically love each other. Don't put it in the comments. It's boring. Because Milo isn't acting platonically here. He gets jealous, intensely jealous, when he sees Morbius kiss Martine. He goes even so far as to kill the girl in revenge. And he constantly insists on letting loose and not hiding what they are. It's right there. It's barely subtext. It's honestly more text than it is subtext. Like, I'm sorry. It's not the main thrust of the movie necessarily, but it's definitely a present thing. And it annoys me every time I see it in vampire media, and it annoyed me a lot here because, one, it was very poorly done, but also because I just think that it's problematic. Using vampirism as a metaphor for homosexuality leans into a very real trope that we are constantly dealing with in real life, that homosexuality is intrinsically predatory and dangerous. And True Blood is worse at it than this movie, honestly, because, it's just very on the nose about the metaphor, but we do have to acknowledge that textually, vampires are monsters. They drink people. They are intrinsically dangerous, whereas gay people are just fucking people. Don't get me wrong, people in general can be dangerous, but there's nothing intrinsically dangerous about them. Whereas with vampires, there's always that possibility that they just decide to drink you. Bitch, I eat people! And the issue that I have with this is that right now, in Florida, we are dealing with the ramifications of this trope. People are conflating talking to kids about homosexuality at all in any context with grooming them. And there's a long-standing tradition where talking about homosexuality at all is the equivalent of grooming them to a lot of people. And we're seeing it right now. And it's not okay. And I feel like this movie kind of leans into that trope when it doesn't have to. I get it. It makes it more interesting in some ways. But at the same time, we need to dismantle this trope because it's damaging to the LGBTQ community. Gay people are not dangerous. Sexuality is not dangerous. And teaching kids proper sex ed, little things like what the names of their genitals are so that they can communicate when people are touching, and that it's okay if you feel attraction to someone of the same gender, that it's normal for a man and a man, a woman and a woman, a non-binary and a non-binary, whatever and a whatever, that it's normal for people to love each other, and that love manifests in a lot of different ways. And as long as we establish, the kids will be better off. And the issue, bring this back to the movie, again, I just feel like having this trope there at all is problematic. But that's not necessarily what I want to focus on, because this movie fails at one thing worse than it fails at most other things, and that's just something that I want to mention. So, to reiterate, love is love. It's okay that Matt Smith is gay. It's not okay that he drinks people, probably, unless they consent. Martine consented at the end of the movie. Maybe that's what we should focus on. Martine consented to be drank at the end of the movie, and those other guys didn't. So Matt Smith in this movie was a predator, but that doesn't mean that gay people are predators. Don't drink people without their consent. Also, don't have sex with people without their consent. I just didn't want to end this as something depressing. I've recorded this 3 times and it's been very difficult each time. So, I'm sorry. Let's go to the next section. So one of the things that this movie does a lot worse than most movies, be a good story. But also, it is technically trying to do something different than most superhero movies. It's trying to be an anti-hero. And there are a couple of examples of anti-hero movies that are in media that are very popular, and that's because they're usually better done. So the Netflix series Punisher is a great example of an anti-hero that actually genuinely works. There's also Deadpool, and both of these properties work for entirely different reasons. But it's quite obvious what Sony was trying to do. They had a bit of success with Venom, and I guess Venom 2, which I still have not seen. I'll probably get around to it. I just don't feel excited for the movie because Venom 1 was fine, as you can see from my MCU movie review, but I just wasn't super jazzed about this one. But the reason Venom was an interesting movie was because Venom as a character is always an anti-hero. eats people, and Morbius does too, but the way that they go about it is the problem. So Venom eating people is one, kind of played for laughs, and I know that's weird to say, but it's true. That's the ending of Venom, was that he ate a dude who was just mildly rude to him, and that's a joke. That's what it's supposed to be. It would have been better if it was R-rated and had a little bit more gore, but it is what it is. Beyond that, though, this movie is trying to make Morbius out to be an anti-hero, and it's failing because they never portray him as an anti-hero. So let's start with defining what an anti-hero is, and then talk about how Morbius isn't that. So, in my opinion, in order to be a proper anti-hero, you have to have two things: moral agency, and to be morally gray with said agency. So the first thing I'm going to define is moral agency, because it's way simpler than gray morality. What I mean by that is your protagonist, your anti-hero in this, has to have the ability to understand morality. They have to have the ability to know what is right and what is wrong, and the ability to act on that understanding. And to the movie's credit, Morbius does have moral agency. That's where the second bit comes in, where they have to be morally gray. And I don't feel like Morbius is a morally gray character. He does one or two questionable things that he has control over him doing. And outside of that, all of his things are objectively good things to do. Now, he may not be on the right side of the law, but the law is not moral. The law speaks to what is lawful, not what is moral or ethical. Let's go over a couple of morally gray characters, talk a little bit about them and what makes them morally gray, and then we'll talk about why Morbius isn't like them. So, one of the classic anti-heroes of our time, of the last 20 years, is Dexter, who I hear has a soft reboot or something of his show. I haven't watched it. I stopped at like season 5 because it got boring. But I still watched for the first 5 seasons, which is more than I would say for the Morbius movie, because I would not watch this again, and I don't think I would watch any sequels unless there is, 1, a sequel, and 2, you guys pay me to do it, because I won't do it for free. Dexter is a serial killer who decides to kill other serial killers. He kills murderers, he kills rapists, he kills bad people, presumably Jared Leto, given that he's a statutory rapist, as opposed to letting his dark passenger, as he calls it, kill innocent people who don't deserve it. So that's what makes him an anti-hero. He has this darkness inside of him. He claims that he cannot control it, even though that's, even in the show, it's demonstrably untrue that he can't. But he chooses not to. Instead, he chooses to rid the world of people whom he's decided don't deserve to exist anymore. It's probably for the net good, but also he's still a murderer. Then we have an example like Frank Castle, someone who is very okay with murder. He murders cops, he murders other heroes, but he does have a moral code that he enforces. He will not murder anyone he does not see fit to, and he always can justify it within his own morality. Then there's someone like Deadpool, who effectively is an anti-hero by merit of he's apathetic to the violence that he causes. Like, he doesn't want people to get hurt, but he's also not incredibly upset if they do. He just doesn't have a strong moral conviction to not hurt. It's not that he goes out of his way to do so. And Harley Quinn is the same way, basically. And then there's Venom, who Eddie Brock works as a conscience towards and tries to push to do the right thing. But also, Venom, again, is kind of apathetic to the plights of humans and hungry. So in all of these examples, they all do morally reprehensible things, but there's some level of justification for some of them, or they're just not incredibly concerned about it in others. Morbius doesn't do that. Let's go over a couple of Morbius's actions, then we'll see what I'm talking about. Because everything that Morbius does in this movie is either good or not really his fault entirely. So we open the movie by establishing that he saved countless lives with his knockoff True Blood. Drink New Blue True Blood. He's literally a doctor who has made more medical advancements than most heroes ever do. That alone could probably disqualify him from being an anti-hero, and yet people still consider him an anti-hero. He's actively researching rare blood disease and has made a ton of headway. Sure, he breaks some ethical guidelines to save his own life, and that's framed as a bad thing in the movie, but I don't think anyone would fault him for that, at least not in the same way that we fault Frank Castle for murdering hundreds of mobsters without any regard for them, or the way that Deadpool lets his collateral damage get out of control. Morbius is still ultimately really selfless because he chooses to make himself a guinea pig as opposed to doing this to anyone else. He does bust open some mercs like their Capri Sun in the movie, but he was completely out of his gourd with blood hunger and not morally culpable for that. Like, he wasn't able to make a different decision because he wasn't aware there was a decision to be made. He does the classic Louis from Interview with the Vampire where he just constantly laments that he's a monster, and it's really boring. But also, on top of that, it's not the action of a morally gray superhero. It's the action of someone who doesn't want to drink blood. Like, he tries to isolate himself from the world, and he would have succeeded if it hadn't been for Milo literally dragging him out after it's revealed that he didn't do the crime that he thought he did. He felt a massive amount of guilt over the crimes, which is not something that anti-heroes usually do, or if they do feel that guilt, they can usually just overcome it by saying that it was for the moral good in their own minds. He is paralyzed by guilt when he thinks that he killed the nurse. And the only reason that he breaks that isolation is because he's now aware there is a bigger threat than he is to the outside world. So, again, that's not the action of an anti-hero. Even when he's doing something that would be morally reprehensible, like hurting someone, he first gave them the chance to surrender and leave. In the scene where he steals the counterfeiting operation, he literally just breaks someone's hand and lets them go without hurting them further than that. And he gives them medical advice at the end of the scene so that it will heal properly. Like, okay, kind of a dick move, I guess, but like, Spider-Man literally throws people off of buildings sometimes, and Batman has literally done that on several occasions. It's literally one of his go-to moves. And we consider Batman unapologetically a hero in most cases. He even develops a stake, one of the medical stakes, in order to stab himself with, meaning that he was, at one point at least, willing to murder himself to save the world from his vampirism. So, like, even if we wanted to make him an anti-hero, what we would need to do to this is give him a more complex motivation than Louis from Interview with the Vampire, maybe develop him further as a character, instead of just making him the classic vampire stereotype and being boring with it. Nothing that he does is morally gray enough to warrant him being an anti-hero, and that's the only angle of this that was even potentially interesting. But they failed at it so hard that the rest of the movie failed. Their entire basis for this movie doesn't work because they made their protagonist objectively a good person, and they made Milo so cartoonishly evil that there wasn't even a moral struggle. So, counter to my other point, maybe if they had made Milo a little less objectively psychotic and made their relationship more explicit, where Morbius and Milo do love each other, and we hate the path that Milo has taken, and we hate the fact that we have to kill them, and we really make this visceral instead of just like telling us that it's happening. We really try to make us feel for that, but we'd have to cut so much other flab from the movie. And again, the movie's not even terribly long, but we could cut other scenes in order to push this. That would have been a far more interesting movie than this, where we have a moral question. There's no moral question. One person is an objectively good person, one person is objectively bad for society. This isn't a movie about an anti-hero, it's just a boring hero, and that's unfortunate. So, in conclusion, this movie sucks. You shouldn't watch it. There are literally hundreds of better movies, tens of thousands of better movies you could watch. I would imagine you could throw a dart at anything on Netflix right now and you'd find something better. But if you want a recommendation from me personally, Interview with the Vampire, it's better done than this by a lot. And I don't even like Interview with the Vampire. I thought it was like trite and kind of annoying. The only happy memory that I have about Interview with the Vampire is one time a bank teller when I was younger and prettier told me that I look kind of like Lestat, and I chose to take that as a compliment. I chose that instead. If you're into hero media, any Marvel movie, Shazam, watch Shazam. They have a better like fight sequence in the sky, and the movie's actually fun to watch. I should review Shazam. Maybe for next year's December, I'll review Shazam. I'll just review movies that I actually liked in December instead of shitty bad movies like the entire Snyderverse. Alternatively, if you just want weird like undead media, like Ghostly Bodies, just read Ghostly Bodies. I'll get around to recording the rest of the audiobook. I have a better microphone right here, so I might just record all of it over again and then sell that. If you want like vampire-specific media, Thought Slime suggested Jacob's Wife and Blood Sky. I haven't watched them myself, but they sound pretty good. I've been meaning to watch them. I just kind of forgot that they existed. What else? Jared Leto's a creep. Like, we should stop supporting Jared Leto. I mean, one, he's a mediocre actor. Like, I've never seen him in anything that's particularly interesting. And two, like, going back to the groomer issue, like, there are several allegations from women who say that he hit on them when he was underage. Some people claim that he slept with 15-year-olds. That's not cool, bro. So, like, don't do that. That's bad. Let's not have Jared Leto in any more movies for a while. We can do a TJ Miller where he's just not allowed in movies for a while. It'd be the best decision, I think. Yeah. Outside of that, you should like this video. That'd be a cool thing for you to do. I'd appreciate it. You should also like comment, like if you want more opinions on on these movies, have an idea of something I could do. I'll probably take it under consideration. You could subscribe. You could subscribe to my Patreon so that I can make money doing this. That'd be pretty cool. Beyond that, I guess I've been your gay vampire loving movie critic signing off.